This is part 2, where Pam now talks about what can you actively do, what skills can you employ to turn resilience into true authoritative action. Pam, how do you take resilience, that mental state of toughness and coping, and translate it into genuinely influencing positive change? I'd love to get your tips on what are the skills and the processes that we need.
Okay, so this is a question I get asked quite often. In as much, what made you think you could take on the government? What made you think you could talk to the Prime Minister? Okay, I could sit here and just tell you my story, but to be honest, if it was me on the reverse end, that would be too boring. So I've come up with a little plan for you. Because I thought, yes, I can only tell you what I experienced. However, I can explain it. Oh, make sure I'm in the camera shot. I can explain it in such a way that it would work for anybody that wants to move into action. So, you know me, while CV19 is going on, I'm sick and tired of PowerPoint. I'm just not doing it. So we're going back to this, the good old fashioned. So as you have beautifully mentioned before, you all start off with your acceptance and then working on your resilience. So you've got those two factors in place. Now, the one thing which a lot of people will share with me, not everyone I suppose, is if you imagine I was sat there running Paddington Survivors Group and it was a support group. So I tend to be one of these people that when I understand things or people can give me a good reason as to why something's happened, I am fairly Snow White-ish. So I am laid back and I'm talking to the animals and all that sort of stuff. If I find that people have tried to get away with things, or that I have a very strong sense of injustice. And what we were finding out when I was running Paddington Survivors Group was that the whole industry had put profit for human safety. They had decided it was cheaper to pay compensation if something terrible happened than it would be to put right what was obviously wrong. That to me rose my sense of injustice. So within the group, I get mad and I become the Hulk. But now you may laugh at me doing this silly cartoony stuff, but I'm not joking. This really does drive you forward into action. However, there is angry and there's angry. Angry is jumping up and down, shouting, screaming the odds, and generally not doing very much at all. The other form of anger is cold. It's okay, but I need to do this intelligently. I need to move into an area where my action has authority. My action may need to not rebel against, but confront authority. So you've got those two types of authority there. So the first thing you should always do, what I did, was you research. This is where most people get the action point wrong. Research is so important before you move into authority. The way it happened for me was there were 4 parts when I sat down to strategize. So the first one was obvious. I had to tackle the rail industry. Okay. In order to do that, still being angry, it was no good me jumping up and down like a survivor because they could just ignore me. So I became a lay engineer. I sat down and I learnt acronyms, I learnt about safety systems, I learnt about rail signals. It's all information. Back then we didn't have the internet. This was all through going to the library. The rail industry, I can tell you, have got at last count, I read 120 pages of acronyms. It's just huge. But I turned myself and members of my group into people that could talk to them in their language. That's the important thing. It was no good going, how dare you do this to us? They'd just go, oops, sorry, here's a bit of money, go away. The second pillar that I had to consider was government. Now, the way I was justifying this in my head was no party stays in power all of the time. So at the moment, we've got Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrats, and a few other little people bubbling along in the background. So I said to the group, we have to talk to them, but we need to do it cross-party. Because if we get what was then the Labour government to agree to implement all of Lord Cullen's recommendations when they come out, and then the Conservatives get in power, they could just go backwards and refuse to implement it. The changes that the rail system needed was billions, absolutely billions. And so we did exactly that. And the way you get to a politician's heart is, to be honest, I think I was lucky because of the plastic mask.
And Pam, I'm going to come in here because I just wanted to reiterate some elements of what you're saying. Your anger was very clinical. It's a deliberate choice of a word that's a medical word. It wasn't emotive anger, it was targeted and clinical. And so is your research. It's research that says, who are the stakeholders here? And I need to know them as well as they know themselves and speak their language.
Yeah. And the one advantage with Parliament or Prime Ministers or politicians is, A, they are human. They're no different to you and I. But B, they want to get voted in. So if you threaten their popularity, they're more likely to listen to you. Now, that sounds terrible that you issue threats, but unfortunately, it's a reality. If you want things changed, you have to get laws changed. You also have to get them leaning on the people in the rail industry in order to get things changed. So, yes, you're right, clinical is a good word. I've always referred to it as hot and cold. I'm either hot angry when I'm very emotional, or I'm cold where I am sort of assessing how do I get what I want. Now, the third pillar, and these all joined together, you may not see this when it's up on board, was the media. So the media was important because just as much as the government will bring pressure on the rail industry, the media can bring pressure on the government because, again, these guys want to be voted in. Even today, and in fact, it's worse today with social media, etc. You've seen how the media can bring down politicians. You've also seen how the media, if you get them on side, can be really helpful. They support them. I mean, look at the fabulous work they've been doing in getting money and people donating things to the NHS. So they can be a force for good. They can also be a force for bad. Don't get sucked in. Unless you want to be famous, which I never did, they can turn on you on a pinhead. They really can. So you have to...
Can you tell us more about this? Because I just want to bring this to life a little bit.
Yeah.
You were, I mean, some of the things you achieved where in government there was a transport minister called Stephen Byers.
Yeah.
And within 3 days, you took from a position where he was calling you out as a troublemaker to getting him removed from office. Now, that's extraordinary. How did you do that? What skills did you use? How did you manipulate the media legitimately to make something like that happen? Help us understand that.
Well, in Stephen Byers' case, he was the Secretary for Transport, and we'd been having meetings with him in his offices up at Parliament. And he happened to mention at a meeting, that because we knew that Lord Cullen was going to say Railtrack was mainly to blame for what happened during our crash, he felt that Railtrack had to go. And he said something along the lines back then of, oh, you'll hear something in an announcement in a few weeks that will really please you. So he had already made a decision to get rid of Railtrack. A few weeks later, he was in Parliament and he stood up and said he was closing down Railtrack, but said that was only a decision he'd made then. And my ears perked up because I wasn't anywhere near him, I was at home, but I went, hang on a sec, he'd told us about 3 weeks earlier. One thing a politician cannot do is lie in the House of Commons. It's just, that is a sackable offence. And I was sort of sat there thinking, okay, now I tend to write notes. My hands were working then because my memory was so shocking. I was still on morphine back then and your memory just disappeared completely. So I went and got my notes from the meeting, and yes, it was dated. I then contacted the other survivors, the 2 other survivors that had been with me at the same meeting, and they confirmed what I had heard. So I then phoned Andrew Marr, who is lovely. He's a lovely journalist. I like him. And told him. And it was only because, again, it's that sense of injustice. It's how dare you lie in Parliament. That's one of the tenets you don't do. So once I told Andrew Marr, well, then it was fan, proverbial, you know what, hating it.
So so I'm hearing is know the people that have influence and get them on your side. That's a key element of turning resilience into action. Is that right?
It is, yes. And also, I'd like to think that everyone, particularly in business, in our government, I expect the highest standards, particularly from our government. So to me, if you set yourself on that stool, you need to be squeaky clean, and you need to do everything with humanity and humility. And if Stephen Byers had made those decisions and then said, oops, yes, I forgot, but no, his plan was to try and find muck to throw at me. So his defence was point the finger at someone else, get it off me. Whereas if it just turned around at that time and said, oops, yes, sorry, I really shouldn't have done that, it probably would have all forgotten. But he didn't. And I could prove that he didn't, that he had lied. So that was the reason. So I'm not saying I'm very proud. I'm not proud of having got rid of somebody, because it was his livelihood at the time. And apart from that, he was quite good at what he was doing.
But it's also, Pam, about value-based, isn't it? It's value-based decision making. It's do things.
Yeah. And I think if particularly, this is one of the things I think about the virus is, I'm going off at a slight tangent here. If this is an opportunity, and I want it to be an opportunity for us to all work in business, but in a more humane way, in a way that takes into account other things that are far more important, like the environment, like the planet, like our neighbours, our communities and stuff, I'm all for that. But if we're going to go back to the old way of gathering everything for ourselves and keeping it and getting upset if somebody earns £1 million and we only earn a tenner, that's not really the sort of system I want to go back to. So I'll probably take to the mountains and become a hermit somewhere. I'll think about that when this is all over.
I'm getting real rigour in your pillars here, in the research. There's real rigour. So what's that 4th pillar, Pam?
Yeah, the 4th pillar, oh, by the way, to keep the media happy, you have to keep giving them new tidbits. Otherwise, they just get bored, is the general public. Now, this, I always said, was our biggest asset. The British public do not realise how powerful they are. They really are. They frighten this lot, and this lot. But they don't realise, or there's no way that they can focus that energy into one laser point. With our campaign, I was very careful via the media to give out messages that only had one soundbite per message. Don't confuse people. Keep the language simple. There's no point, because I'm a red person, that I can expect somebody, I don't know, that hasn't had the privilege of the same education I have, of knowing long words. So we kept it very simple. And we kept on appealing to the public directly. We kept on saying to them, if you don't help us, it will happen again. So by keeping the public on side, the media channeled public opinion for us, which then put pressure on government, which then helped to turn the industry around. So that really was the 4 pillars. That's how we succeeded. We are the only survivors, and this I am proud of, we are the only survivor group that has actually had, out of Lord Cullen's recommendations, 93% of them were put into action. So I'm really proud of that fact. And yeah, it's something that I will continue to be proud of. But that idea, the being laid back, getting angry, then doing my research, that happens now every single project I do.
And thank you, Pam, because what I get is that is rigor. Do that research about the 4 main stakeholder groups with a scientific eye and passion, which is incredible. But then you add, and I want to repeat this because it's so important, make sure that your messaging to those groups is incredibly simple, is maybe only one key thing, and is value-based.
Yes.
If you do that, you unlock.
And they come to respect you, because we're now talking, 20 years later, I have just been commissioned by the rail regulator, again, to review how well they're doing on safety, how well the rail industry is doing on safety. So if you've gained that sort of respect, they then do turn back to you. And I take that as a compliment. I do take that as a compliment. So yes, it's well worth it. Plus, it makes your action endearing or enduring. I don't mean endearing, I mean enduring.
Well, both actually. I think the style is important, isn't it? This point about cold anger means that it comes over as adult to adult rather than upset sort of child state. I'd love to conclude with your perspective on what's the next big cause that you believe in, because the rail is an ongoing, enduring cause. It's awesome that the government is saying, can you be our advisor and our conscience? That's quite right. For you personally, Pam, what's the next big cause you think you can help to solve or better?
Well, I think because I became a speaker and I enjoy it so much, I think I'll always keep that up, but it may become I'll be perfectly honest with you. I would like a bit more balance in my own life. So I love what I do as a job, but I don't want to be doing it every single day. I want to get myself to the stage where I can pick and choose which ones I do. So as you know, because we are friendly, I am now considering a physical move to the Welsh countryside. I love the mountains around there. I like the sea being close. And I sort of have these visions of me, and I wasn't joking when I said a hermit, of me becoming Farmer Pam. In as much it would be a weird farm, because I want chickens, goats, a donkey, a Shetland pony, all this sort of stuff. But there will be a time when I will turn up to pick a friend up from the train station, and I will have hair everywhere. I won't be having any makeup, and I'll be in welly boots and an old anorak held together with a piece of string. That will be the new Pam. But the big thing that I really hope, I'm just beginning to investigate, is I've got involved with a group of executive leaders, global, across the world, IEDP, and we are meeting occasionally on Zoom, discussing how it might be possible to change the structure of our capitalist society across the world to bring exactly what I've mentioned before, that humanity back into the corporate structure. So it's not because they're inhumane, I don't mean that. However, sometimes their results can be a bit questionable. So it's whether that will develop into a movement that can then gather steam. That's the bit I don't know, but that's the bit I'm investigating at this point in time.
Pam, I love that. I sign up to it. I also think that, and I'm recording this, of course, for a Boostcast, I think you on film, like we've done here, brings so much opportunity to just share the film. You could be a hermit and we share the film that you've created.
And just sit in my hut and talk to you all.
And the books that you have written, which I mentioned to you earlier, it's one of the only books I've ever read twice because of the inspiration, but also there's some real clarity like you have on this Boostcast about this is what you actually should be doing rather than just thinking a good game. So
now, I suppose, if I may finish on a little bit, I've always said you do not have a right to complain if you're not prepared to do something about it. So really, it does come down to that. You have to be prepared to stick your head over the parapet. And just because you might have a way off army idea doesn't mean it's not valid. It should be expressed because you don't know who might run with it. So yes, I'm lucky. I'm lucky because my brain does think in a very unusual way.
Pam, that was just fabulous. Thank you.